I was recently tagged in the 10 influential books tag by MartheBozart, I believe is how you pronounce her name. I believe that only because, well, I've seen her name and I'm terrible at pronunciation. This tag was originally started by Read Susie Read, and basically the idea is that you list 10 books that have been influential to you in however way you decide to define the word influential. The rule is that you are not supposed to spend too much time on this. I'm thinking the hope is that you are going to uncover books that have been influential to you, but may possibly not be considered great books. And the idea is that you might be influenced by books that are not considered great books. So that's what I've hopefully done here, although I will add a little bit of commentary to each one of the books to give you a reason as to why I feel that they might be influential. But I will tell you that finding these 10 books was very, very, very easy. I took a casual look over at that bookshelf over there and came across with these books. It was actually quite easy. So I divided them into 3 categories. The first being books that influenced me as a reader, the second being books that influenced me as a writer, and the third being books that fit into neither of those 2 categories, but they were still influential. The first category being books that influenced me as a reader, and the first book being Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This was the first book that I read outside of, say, Goosebumps that I actually enjoyed as a reader. I read this in high school, so fairly late probably to most people who read books quite often, but I was a late reader. I read a couple of Goosebumps books, as I just mentioned, in junior high, grade school, that sort of thing. But I picked this up in high school for whatever reason, and it was really enjoyable to me, and I kind of learned that book reading could be fun. And that's why this book is influential to me. The second is The Stranger by Albert Camus. This is very influential to me because I learned by reading this that books did not have to have a concrete moral lesson. There could be some ambiguity there, and until reading this book I never experienced that before. And this book is very much ambiguous. There's lots of interpretation as to what really the moral message, if there is one, is supposed to be. And I still am not sure. I read this book, I try to read this book about once a year, and even after every time I read it, I still never know concretely what exactly the book is trying to tell me. But I know it's something that's very interesting and something I need to keep digging for. So it's a lifelong project, and I was surprised that a book could have that much weight to it, especially given that it's a very short book. Very, very influential. That's number 2. Number 3 is Dante's Inferno. This kind of happened to come along right about the same time that Mary Shelley's Frankenstein did, and that I was at a time in my life when I really didn't read a whole lot. And this book came along, and I thought, wow, books can do that. This book, actually, I was made aware of via the movie Seven with Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman and Kevin Spacey. It was a fantastic movie. If you haven't seen it, definitely see it. But that book really introduced me to Dante. It introduced me to John Milton, other authors that I just never really saw through the lens of a popular medium like movies. So I started reading them, and I really enjoyed them, and they had a lot of symbolism that I was never familiar with, never used to. I really took a liking to them. Chaucer was another one that I was introduced to via that movie, and I honestly probably could have chosen Chaucer off of my shelf just as easily as I could have chosen this one. So it introduced me into a style of writing, into an entire genre of writing that I just wasn't aware of, and it was very, very influential to me. Category number 2 are books that influenced me as a writer, and this category contains more books than either of the other 2 categories because most of the books that I've read, at least in the last 10 years or so, did influence me as a writer, because a lot of times when I was reading during that period, and still to some degree now, I was reading it through the lens of a writer, and I was trying to pick up on writerly lessons more so than just being entertained by it as a reader. So unfortunately, and perhaps unfairly, this list is weighted toward those books. The first one is House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. I've talked about this book so many times on this channel because it's freaking amazing. This book taught me that writing could do more than just be words on a page. It could actually, it could physically change the way that the person reads a book. I mean, you just take a quick flip through this book and you can see the book itself is very unique, very crazy, the way it's laid out, but the story still holds up. So it was very interesting for me to see that a book could contain this engaging story but be displayed in a physical format that's so different and so unique from the rest of anything else. It's really influenced me, and it also influenced me considerably, especially with my book As a Machine in Parts, which was sort of my way of dipping my toe into this weird textual layout style. So very influential there. The second book is Altman's Tongue by Brian Evanson. Again, I've talked about Brian Evanson much like I've talked about House of Leaves so much on this channel. I love Brian Evanson. His work never disappoints. This was for my first introduction to Brian Evanson, and this is still, I think, to some extent, his most famous book. It's a collection of short stories, Altman's Tongue it's called, and his writing style was so unique, and it spoke to me at that time in my life and my writing development. It was something that I really needed to see. I needed to read. His stories are very almost scientific in a way. They're very detached. They're very visceral and grotesque, but they're so interesting and so intriguing. And I just really needed to see that was possible, because at the time, and still even now, that was how my mind worked, and that was the direction it was going. So to know that something like that was possible was very, very important to me as a writer. American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. This one influenced me for really the only reason that it influenced me is because this book depicts a protagonist, a main character, that is absolutely unlikable. And that goes against every single piece of writing advice out there. They always, writing instructors, people tell you that you need to write characters that are likable in some way. Likable doesn't have to mean that you necessarily would sit down and have a beer with them, but likable in the sense that they're relatable, they're understandable, you get them. Patrick Bateman in American Psycho is not that, but he is still very much an engaging character, and you can still get through this entire book without having to question his validity as a likable character. You just, for some reason, it works, and I don't know how it works. And I read this book often. I try to reread it once a year to try to figure out how Bret Easton Ellis does it. And so far, I think the only thing I've picked up on is really the pity factor. You pity this Patrick Bateman for being controlled by his sadistic personality. You almost feel as though that's not his choice. But I don't know if that's enough. I still don't know if that's enough, but for some reason it works. And I continue to try to find out how it works. If I learn anything, I'll let you know. Blindness by Jose Saramago, or Jose Saramago, if you want to be all Portuguese about it. It's very, very, very good. This was my first introduction to Jose Saramago. It's definitely not my last. I've read almost all of his books because they're so amazing. What's amazing about this from a writer's perspective is that he is able to convey such an incredible amount of information with such an incredible amount of personality in a way that would normally be distracting. I mean, I could show you the way the text is laid out right now. See how that's basically one giant block of text? There's not really a whole lot of paragraph breaks, and you can't see it in the camera, the lens right now, but there's also no punctuation, really. Commas, that's about it. There's very few periods even. But it's so engaging the way that it's written, and even though it contains so little punctuation, so few paragraph breaks, it's just a block of text. It's that physical format. It goes against what you would expect, yet it still works incredibly well, and that's something I'm constantly trying to figure out exactly how that's done. So I do read Jose Saramago as often as I possibly can. I have a couple of his books left that I have not read, and I have not read them simply because he's dead, and I want to save everything I possibly can. There's only so many morsels left of his writing that I gotta pace myself, so it's very good stuff. The final one in this category, I don't know what number this is. This looks like to be there's two left, 7, I guess this would be. Number 7, this is Amy Hempel's collected stories, and specifically, there is one book by her that I would say drew me to, that influenced me as a writer more so than all of her other works, but I will go ahead and compile all of her stories and say they're all very influential into this collected stories. Amy Hempel has a writing style that is very, very unique. She almost writes with a poetic slant. Her stories are they're very turn of phrase, almost clever in a way, but not clever in a way that you feel like you were robbed at the end of the story. You're reading the story, you're very invested in it, but every sentence to me sounds like in lesser hands it would make an entire story. So she, basically what that means is that Amy Hempel is able to take an idea, something that most authors would try to stretch out into an entire story or an entire novel, and she says, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to make that one sentence of a story. Every single sentence has so much impact, and there's so much power in every single one of her sentences, and I'm not even exaggerating. Every single one of Amy Hempel's sentences is a story in and of itself, but it never feels like you're being bogged down by information. So I highly recommend Amy Hempel. Two more books, and these are books that really couldn't fit into either of those two categories, so I guess I could call it miscellaneous. So the first one is The Art Instinct by Dennis Dunn. I read this book a few years ago, and it's very good. It's a nonfiction book. It's the only nonfiction book on this list, I believe. It's very interesting. It explores the idea of art as instinct. And there could really be plenty of nonfiction books on this list that are influential to me, but this is probably the most influential. It really helped me sort of legitimize the idea of art. It's something I'm always trying to legitimize. I'm trying to explain how important art is. And even for the most part, I have to be honest and say that a lot of times when I'm trying to defend art as something that's important, even I'm like, I don't really know how I'm going to defend this. I really don't know, what does it really mean? And this book really helped solidify what art actually is and how and why it's influential, or why it's an instinct, why it's important to the evolutionary nature of humanity, not just physical evolution, but evolutionary psychology as well. So it's extremely good. I highly recommend you pick it up. The final book, which is kind of cheating because it's actually 3 books, but really the reason why this is influential, this is Tim Hall, 3 of Tim Hall's books. He's had more than 3 books since then, but these are his first 3 books, I believe. And the reason why this is influential is because, to me, it opened my eyes to the idea of an author having a personal relationship with the reader, and I'll explain why. This is 3 books collected in a handmade slipcase. You can see here. Let me see if I can open this up here real quick. So there's 3 books in this handmade slipcase. I haven't taken them out in quite a while, so I don't know if I'll be able to get them out. But basically, Tim Hall handmade this slipcase on his own. And this was one of the first introductions I had of Tim Hall. He was selling his books at a steep discount anyway, 3 books for the price of like 2. But he was also throwing in this handmade slipcase, which took time, a lot of time, and it looks really cool. It's this awesome like little image of a boat. It's like a shadow box boat, so you can see it's kind of 3-dimensional. It says boat on the side. It has some information on the back. I mean, it's very, very cool. And so I actually replicated this a couple times for some books that I was involved with, creating some handmade slipcases, because I felt that was such a cool concept to spend time that you're not getting paid for, obviously, because you're just doing it for fun, but time to create these slipcases, some personal, very, very personal touch for people who are buying your books or reading your books. And I've done that, like I said, many times since I learned about it, I guess, through Tim Hall. And it's been very influential in that sense. And I really, really respect other writers and other artists who do that. I understand it's not something that every artist or author can do, but I do really respect it when they do. It makes me feel sort of a little bit closer to them, so I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for enduring this video. It's much longer than most of my videos, I assure you. Most of them are not nearly this long, but I wanted to do this tag justice because I do think books as an influence is an important topic to explore, and I think it's very cool, at least when I'm watching other booktubers talk about influential books. It's very interesting to me, so I hope this was interesting to you. Please subscribe if you're not subscribed to this channel. Please share this video. All of that helps me very, very, very much. Also, I did just start a Patreon page, so please, if you don't mind, if you'd like to, go to Patreon, patreon.com/CalebJRoss or calebjross.com/Patreon to find out more information about how you can support these videos that I create. Also, I'm supposed to tag people in this video. That's part of tagging. But I just realized that I was supposed to tag people just now, and I have not thought of anybody to tag prior to creating this video. So I unfortunately won't be able to tag anybody. Perhaps I'll put some people in the description, but that's not nearly as fun ever. I apologize a lot. But thank you for watching.
Don't run. That fans the blade. That's it. Wrap her up. Wait, not over her head. She'll inhale the flame.